It takes into account records. It takes into account everything. It is the most all-encompassing stat. And every time he drops back, the Browns lose more points than any quarterback since 2000, since True Media started.
What started as another routine sports debate quickly turned into one of the most explosive media moments Cleveland has seen all season. Claims were made, numbers were thrown around, and narratives were pushed so aggressively that they immediately went viral. Jay and Jason confidently told audiences that Shedeur Sanders was statistically the worst quarterback of the century, repeating talking points that sounded authoritative but collapsed under scrutiny. What they did not expect was immediate accountability. That accountability came in the form of G. Bush. Rather than matching volume with volume, G. Bush dismantled the entire argument piece by piece. He challenged the misuse of analytics, questioned the timeline of the data being cited, and exposed how selective statistics were being used to mislead viewers.
It's going to get nasty because people are going to want to see it. So in that case, no, the Cleveland Browns and Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, the best thing in the world for them to do is want to see Shedeur Sanders ball out. The best thing, and by the way, if he does play well, they're going to be able to take a great victory lap and be able to like sign their deal away for life. Like, come on, like the first thing they're going to say is, look, we took him in the 5th round. Nobody else took him in the 5th round. We took him here, and guess what? We developed him too. And now look how we got. Think how smart you look if you have the Deshaun Watson deal. You get him for a discount. You develop.
What unfolded was not a shouting match or emotional rant. It was a methodical breakdown that left no room for spin. Receipts were presented, context was restored, and the credibility of the original claims unraveled in real time. The moment resonated far beyond one studio. Clips spread rapidly across social media. Fans, analysts, and former players began rewatching the exchange, realizing that the viral claims about Sanders were built on shaky foundations. What had been framed as advanced analysis suddenly looked more like agenda-driven commentary. This introduction sets the stage for how one segment flipped the entire conversation. It explains why this confrontation mattered, why it struck a nerve with fans, and why the fallout continues to grow. Because this was never just about one quarterback. It was about truth versus narrative, accountability versus amplification, and what happens when misleading claims finally meet real resistance.
When you look at it, a guy who was in the 5th round, who's already thrown for 360 yards in a game, but we disqualify that because it just wasn't what we wanted to see. But yet and still in that game, Cam Ward is the #1 overall pick. His numbers didn't look better than that. You go into this game, I just saw Josh Allen throw for 12 and 19 for 130. Like, let's keep it real. A lot of times what we be doing is, if you like the quarterback, you can find a stat to say you like him. If you don't like the quarterback.
Those claims were presented confidently but without full context. Garrett Bush responded calmly, using verified data, contextual film breakdowns, and comparative statistics to counter every allegation. The exchange shifted from debate to complete exposure as misinformation collapsed under scrutiny. The football world reacted immediately as one analyst methodically corrected years of talking points. One detail stood out clearly. Points were being scored. Offensive production was visible. Shedeur Sanders has now played 5 games, and 3 of those performances resulted in 20 points or more. Dillon Gabriel, by comparison, played 6 games without producing similar consistency.
Better. Okay, well, he took what was given to him underneath the last game against the Bills. By the way, who was a Super Bowl caliber team. Last week against the Bears, Super Bowl caliber team. Both teams 11 wins. So, you know, I don't know what you expect. This is 2 playoff teams, 2 of the best teams in the league, and he's playing with backups at offensive line. His #1 running back is out of the game, no receivers, and in 5 or 6 games, we use these stats to say, oh, he's not the guy. But I just saw Dillon Gabriel not do that. I didn't see Deshaun Watson not do that.
Contrast was impossible to ignore once placed side by side. The atmosphere on UCSS shifted rapidly. Jay and Jason, known for sustained criticism of Sanders, entered the discussion prepared to repeat familiar arguments. They referenced draft positioning, quarterback needs, and future prospects, asserting Cleveland must select a quarterback high in the upcoming draft. Garrett Bush remained silent initially, observing without interruption. His posture suggested patience, not hesitation. When the discussion turned toward draft inevitability, the tone changed. Assertions were made that Cleveland would select a quarterback 2nd overall, with no trade required, naming Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore as automatic upgrades.
Y'all notice something? Points are being put on the board. Touchdowns are being scored. Shedeur Sanders has played 5 games, and 3 of them each was 20 points or better. Dylan Gabriel played 6 games.
Garrett Bush listened without reacting, allowing the argument to develop fully. Only after being directly challenged did he lean forward and request clarification. That moment signaled a shift. The justification relied heavily on EPA metrics without situational analysis. While offensive line deficiencies were correctly acknowledged, the argument escalated to an extreme conclusion, claiming Sanders ranked below historical draft failures. The comparison crossed a line, especially when Sanders was positioned beneath Jamarcus Russell. That statement reframed the discussion entirely. Garrett Bush immediately contextualized development, organizational incentives, and roster construction logic. He outlined how Cleveland benefits directly from Sanders succeeding, including long-term contract leverage, developmental credit, and roster flexibility. The response reframed the narrative from failure to opportunity, exposing the flaw in the original argument. Worse than Ryan Leaf, worse than every bust, every backup, every practice squad quarterback who has touched an NFL field in the last 25 years. That is the implication behind labeling him the worst quarterback of this century. But that claim collapses under basic scrutiny. EPA, expected points added, did not even exist in its standardized form until the mid-2000s and was not widely implemented until the 2010s. Comparing 2025 quarterback data to the year 2000 using a metric that was not tracked consistently is fundamentally flawed. It is not analytical precision, it is statistical distortion framed as authority. The argument continued anyway. The metric was defended as accounting for down and distance, field position, home or away splits, game script, time, and score. It was framed as the most comprehensive evaluation tool available. But analytics jargon without context does not equal truth. It becomes noise when applied selectively. Throughout this explanation, Garrett Bush remained silent, composed, observing the argument unravel on its own, allowing every exaggerated claim to stand long enough to be exposed fully. Then the criticism escalated into outright misinformation. Claims were made that Sanders does not understand defensive looks, does not flip protections, does not recognize pressure, cannot throw receivers open, and only completes passes to wide open targets. Each of those statements is directly contradicted by game film. Sanders has been shown adjusting protections at the line, directing running backs in pass protection, delivering tight window touchdowns in preseason action, and extending plays with his legs when protection breaks down. Those are not opinions. Those are documented snaps. The assertion that personnel inside the building confirmed these deficiencies pushed the narrative further away from reality. That was the point where Garrett Bush finally responded. He reframed the discussion around opponent quality and surrounding conditions. Sanders faced 2 playoff-caliber defenses in Buffalo and Chicago. Both teams had double-digit wins. He did so behind a depleted offensive line, without a full complement of receivers, and without his primary running back. Context matters, especially when evaluating a rookie in limited starts. The response then shifted toward broader league comparisons. The same analysts praising other quarterbacks ignored games where those players produced minimal yardage. Highly touted prospects delivered statistically empty performances without receiving the same condemnation. Selective outrage exposed the inconsistency. When those performances were excused, Sanders were weaponized. Garrett Bush highlighted the core issue, constantly moving expectations. When the offense operated underneath, criticism focused on a lack of vertical passing. When deep throws were completed efficiently, the standard shifted to rigid structure. When Sanders adjusted and took what defenses allowed, that too was dismissed. The goalpost never stopped moving. The critique was never about development. It was about refusal to acknowledge progress. The final dismantling came through simple reality. A 5th-round quarterback had already thrown for 360 yards in a game. That performance was dismissed because it did not align with preconceived narratives. Meanwhile, other prospects with similar or worse outputs remained protected by reputation. That contradiction ended the debate. The argument was no longer about analytics. It was about bias exposed clearly, publicly, and unmistakably. His numbers did not look better than that. Entering that game, Josh Allen went 12 for 19 for only 130 yards, so context matters. Too often, quarterback evaluation turns into preference hunting. If a quarterback is liked, a stat can always be found to support it. If a quarterback is disliked, another stat appears to tear him down. That selective logic is exactly what was exposed. Game scores tell a clearer story. During the Joe Flacco era, the Browns scored 16 against the Bengals, 17 against the Ravens, 13 versus the Packers, and only 10 against the Lions. Not a single outing crossed 20 points. During the Dylan Gabriel stretch, Cleveland posted 17 against the Vikings, 9 against the Steelers, despite 60 pass attempts, then 31 against the Dolphins, largely driven by the run game, followed by 32 versus the Patriots, 27 against the Jets, and 23 against the Ravens. That produced only 2 games over 20 points. Now compare that to the Shedeur Sanders era. Browns versus Raiders produced 24 points in a win. Browns versus 49 ERs delivered 26. Browns versus Titans jumped to 29. Browns versus Bears reached 31. Browns versus Bills finished with 20. In 5 starts, 3 games cleared 20 points. Gabriel had 2 in 6 games. Flacco had 0. The scoreboard does not lie. The math does not lie. Production increased once Sanders took over across the entire league right now today. Despite that, EPA metrics were still weaponized without context. Anonymous people in the building were cited as sources. That claim was immediately challenged. If anyone inside the Cleveland Browns organization truly believes Sanders cannot read defenses or flip protections, that is an organizational failure, not a quarterback flaw. Film shows protections being changed, hot routes identified, and adjustments made pre-snap against quality defenses. The breakdown went further. Sanders threw for 360 yards in a game as a 5th-round rookie behind one of the league's weakest offensive lines. He led the team in rushing for 3 consecutive weeks, showing mobility and play extension. Tight window touchdowns appeared on tape. Adjustments were made weekly based on coaching direction. Results followed. The reality is simple. A rookie entered a dysfunctional environment with poor line play, limited receiver separation, and constant pressure. Even so, scoring improved. The criticism labeling him the worst quarterback of the century was never analysis. It was agenda-driven framing. What unfolded was a methodical dismantling of that narrative using context, film, and scoreboard reality. No emotion was needed. No theatrics were required. Facts handled the work. Moving goalposts were exposed. Cherry-picked stats were neutralized. Anonymous sourcing was questioned. Organizational issues were highlighted. The result was unavoidable. The Browns have been more productive with Shedeur Sanders under center, and that truth is now on record permanently. The fallout from that breakdown did not stop inside one studio. It ripped straight through Cleveland sports media and exposed a deeper problem that has been brewing for years. The quarterback discussion was never really about development or patience. It was about comfort. Certain voices were already invested in a specific outcome, and anything that disrupted that plan was treated like a threat. Shedeur Sanders was never given a neutral evaluation. From the moment he stepped onto the field, the narrative was already written, and every mistake was magnified while every success was minimized or dismissed. This is how bad faith analysis works. Metrics are used selectively, context disappears, situations suddenly do not matter. A collapsing pocket becomes a processing issue. Receivers failing to separate becomes a vision problem. Designed quick game concepts become checkdowns. When Sanders attacked vertically, the criticism was recklessness. When he adjusted and took underneath routes, the criticism was passivity. No version of his game satisfied the people determined to be right before kickoff. Meanwhile, the same grace was extended freely to others. Veteran quarterbacks were praised for managing the game while producing less. Other rookies were excused because of roster limitations, coaching instability, or learning curves. Sanders was denied all of that. He was expected to overcome everything immediately while also being blamed for everything simultaneously. That double standard is not accidental, it is structural. What made the moment so powerful was not volume or anger, it was clarity. Once the scoring trends, game context, and comparative performances were laid out side by side, the narrative collapsed. It became obvious that the criticism had outrun the evidence. The Browns were not worse with Sanders, they were objectively better in the most important category that exists in football, points on the board. That realization is uncomfortable for people who built entire segments, seasons, and reputations pushing the opposite message. It forces accountability, it forces a choice. Either adjust the take or admit the bias. That is why the reaction afterward was silence, deflection, and goalpost movement. The facts were already out, there was nowhere left to run, and this is where the story shifts. Because once a narrative cracks publicly, it rarely heals. It spreads, fans rewind clips, analysts revisit numbers, casual viewers start asking questions. The shield disappears. From this point forward, every critique of Sanders will be measured against the receipts already presented. The conversation has changed permanently. This moment matters far beyond one debate or one show. It directly impacts how Cleveland moves forward as an organization. Quarterback decisions are fragile. They are influenced not just by tape and meetings, but by outside pressure, media framing, and public perception. When narratives become loud enough, they start bleeding into front offices whether people admit it or not. That is why this reset was critical. Shedeur Sanders is no longer just the fifth-round pick. He is now the quarterback associated with improved offensive output, resilience under pressure, and adaptability week to week. That does not mean perfection, it means progress. And progress is exactly what organizations claim they want from young quarterbacks. Development is not linear, it is contextual. Sanders has shown the ability to respond to coaching, adjust his style, and elevate production despite limited support. The most dangerous mistake Cleveland could make now is listening to voices that already proved unreliable. The same analysts pushing worse quarterback narratives were wrong about previous starters. Wrong about roster ceilings, wrong about timelines. Trusting those voices again would be organizational malpractice. The tape, the scoreboard, and comparative league context must outweigh noise. There is also a locker room element that cannot be ignored. Players see who gets blamed unfairly. They see who absorbs hits while others get excuses. Quarterbacks earn trust not only by performance, but by how adversity is handled around them. When a young quarterback continues producing while narratives attack from every direction, teammates notice. Respect grows quietly, but powerfully. Cleveland is at a crossroads. Either commit to evaluating Sanders honestly within structure and stability, or allow external narratives to derail development prematurely. The league is filled with examples of quarterbacks ruined by impatience and noise. It is also filled with examples of teams that ignored media pressure and built properly. The choice is clear. One thing is already settled. The attempt to label Shedeur Sanders as a failure collapsed under scrutiny. That argument is gone. What remains is a young quarterback with tangible production, proven toughness, and growing command. From here on, the debate is no longer about whether he belongs. It is about whether Cleveland is disciplined enough to let the process work.